Okay, so two people sent me questions about a very important topic, death. First, let's hear how Andrea Roberts expresses her questions.
Hi, Vic. So my question is, what is death? Do you mean the physical deaths of our bodies? Are you talking about, the emotional or those transitions and transformations we go in life that are like deaths?
Now, Amna Sheikh wants to add this little bit to the question as well.
How do you define death according to astrology, and what purpose it serves to the journey of the soul?
So when you put something together and give it a form, make it a tangible reality, that's called a birth. And then when that thing falls apart or you take it apart, you end its tangible manifestation, that's called its death. The sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. So the eastern horizon symbolizes birth, western horizon symbolizes death. The eastern horizon is where the sun manifests. It rises, it becomes part of this tangible world. The western horizon is where the sun sets. It becomes unmanifest. So the sun doesn't cease to exist when it goes below the western horizon. It just becomes unmanifest. It loses its manifest or tangible form. And it doesn't begin its existence when it comes over the eastern horizon. It already existed before that. But its tangible manifest existence in our perception begins then. So that's what birth and death are. Birth and death are two states of an eternal thing. Death isn't just something that happens at the end. There's death happening all the time in many different layers, many different levels. And similarly, there's birth happening all the time, many different levels. We're constantly putting new forms together, and we're constantly disassembling old forms. You change your hairstyle, you change your clothes, you grow, you change from being a baby to being a toddler to being a child, being an adult, etc. Dehino sminyata dehe komaram yovanam jara tata dehantara prapti diras tatra namuhyate. You change your form from a komar, from a very small baby, into a yovana, into a youth. And then from a youth you change into jara, an old person. Then tata dehantara, at the end of the body, same thing happens. It's just on a bigger scale, or a different scale. So this dynamic of constant birth and death is the dynamic of our entire universe, our entire world. The entire universe has this character of, although it's eternal, it's constantly changing its tangible form. And that's the dynamic of Punarvasu Nakṣatra. The Taittiriya Brahmana, which I'm working on translating now for my next Nakshatra book, it's got this one sutra on Aditi's Punarvasu, which is really wonderful. It says, Aditi's Punarvasu, right? Aditi is the indivisible goddess. Punarvasu means cyclicity, cyclicality. The cyclicality of the indivisible goddess, or the nature of Aditi's Punarvasu, is Vata Parastat, Ardramavastat, that it needs old, dried out, worn out things. Why? Because Ardramavastat, it wants to make them fresh and new and moist again. So you need death for birth. If you put a bunch of Lego blocks and you build a castle, and then you decide that you want a car, you got to knock the castle apart, because you need those blocks to build your car. You only have a certain limited number of blocks, right? The amount of energy that's in the universe can't change. It's constant. That's a principle of physics. But it can always change its form. So in order for that constant amount of energy to change its form, it needs to knock down its old structure to get the raw materials out of it to build its new structure. That's the principle of Punarvasu, being expressed here as Vata Parastat Ardramavastat. In the Gita, Krishna explains death in the same way as this Punarvasu Sutra. Right? He says, Avyaktadhini bhutani vyakta madhyani bharata avyakta nidhananyeva tatra ka paridevana. He's saying everything is zero first, and it becomes one. Then it goes back to being zero, So why should you cry? Because if it was 0, and then it became 1, when it goes back to becoming 0, that means it's ready to become 1 again. From 0 comes 1, so when it goes back to 0, it will again become 1, so why cry? So it's that cycle of death is there to create birth, and then birth, if you get it right, that's wonderful, but you didn't build the thing right that you actually wanted. We haven't figured out what we really want, so we need to knock it down. Get raw materials again so we can do another birth, give it another try. So try to understand that death is not something imposed on us. Death is something that we want. In Prakriti avasham vashat. Krishna says that the whole world is responding to your will. And that's what birth and death are. We're not happy. That's why we die. We're not satisfied with what we've manifested, so we want to change it. And that's the nature of samsara. Samsara is a cycle of birth and death. You try one birth, and it's not satisfying, you try again. You try again, you try again, you try again. Till you find your mukti, till you find your moksha. And that's where you found, this is who I really am, this is what I really am. Finally, I'm manifesting my true form. And then there's no more necessity for death. Part of the question was like, what is death actually affecting? Does it just affect the body? Does it affect the mind? There's different types of death that affect us on different levels. The verse in the Bhagavad Purana is Mythical, Prakritiko, Nitya, Atyantiko, Layaha. So it's saying you have 4 kinds of destruction. The most common one is Nitya, the Nitya Laya, the constant death, constant destruction. This is one that's just going on all the time. It's like you're on your cellular level. Just in order for you to grow, there has to be death. Some of the cells are dying and then new ones are being built, and that constitutes growth. That's a constant kind of death. And the universe is constantly going through that. Atoms are constantly decaying, so the new ones can be formed. Cells are constantly dying so that new ones can be born. Then there is Naimitic Laya. These are the deaths that happen at the end of certain periods. Like you may occupy a house for a certain amount of time. Sure, you'll change little things in the house while you're living there. That's like the Nitya death, the constant death. But then when you actually leave that house and go to another house, that's like the scheduled destruction, the Naimitika Laya. Okay, you're constantly changing your cells, you're constantly growing from a child to an adult. But when you actually end your occupation of this body, that's the scheduled destruction. It's on a bigger scale. What happens then? When you leave your body, the conscious entity is leaving along with its tools. Conscious entity has the tools of its ability to interact with the world, which is called chitta, and then its ego, its sense of who it is, and then its mind, its emotional desires, and its buddhi, its plans. It carries all those 4 things out of the body with it, being assisted by the pitris from Magha Nakshatra. And then it goes to see Yama from Bharani Nakshatra, goes through some processing there, and then Aryaman and the pitris eventually take the soul, you might say, wrapped up in this mind complex, takes it to its next destination to be born again. Every destruction is followed by a creation. Every death is followed by a birth. In the Gita, Arjuna says, what if there's no such thing as a soul? Is there still a rebirth? And that's when Krishna says that verse, Avyaktadini Bhutani, Vyaktamadhyani Bharata. Everything is 0 first, then 1, then it goes back to 0. So what's the problem? He says even if everything is 0, that from that 0 came 1, so when it goes back to 0, 1 will come out again. So whether you hold that there is some constant conscious principle at the core of who you are, and therefore the death is not the ultimate end, or you say there is no such thing as some constant conscious individual, still death is not the end. Because the energy is constant, it just recycles its forms. Then Arjuna asks Krishna, well, which one is more accurate? Which belief is more accurate? And Krishna says it's more accurate to understand that there's a conscious observer at the core of reality. He's generating reality by his observation of it. So there actually is a conscious entity. We are the conscious entity. but it's very deep in who we are. It's the core foundation of who we are. That thing never dies. That thing never changes. But it's seeking to manifest itself in a fulfilling way, and it hasn't figured out how to do that yet. So it's trying in various ways. That's all the births and deaths that it goes through, and all the changes that it makes in between a birth and a death. So you have all these changes that the consciousness makes. Those are your constant deaths and births. Then you have these major milestone deaths and births, which are like leaving a body. That's the second level. Then you have something called the Prakriti Laya. That's like a destruction of a world or destruction of the universe. The universe also has its births and its deaths, its cycles, where it pops out, expands, and then contracts and crunches back into a singularity, and then waits, and then pops back out of that singularity again, according to the Purāṇas. So those are called Prakritic Layas. They're deaths on a bigger scale even than an individual life and death. And then there's finally the fourth kind of death called Adyantik, which is the ultimate, which is where this is the death of the ego and the mind and the intellect and the desire to interact with the external world. See, the whole reason why we're undergoing death is because we're trying to manifest who we really are in a satisfying way, but we're trying to do it in a venue where we don't belong. We're trying to do it in an externalized venue, away from consciousness, out into matter. So when you finally kill that desire, when you finally say, this was wrong, let me try something else besides that. Let me try to manifest my identity within my own conscious entity and seek the world that's within that. That is the final death, the Adyantika Laya. And that's moksha. And when you have a regular death, your mind and all that stuff doesn't die. It stays with you. But when you have the final death, the mind, plans, and sense of identity, sense of belonging to this world, and sense of wanting to manifest in this world, they all die. And then the consciousness is free to manifest itself within itself. So those are the four kinds of death described in the Purāṇas. As you can see, death is not negative. You'll experience it as something negative when you are hanging on to bits and pieces of what's getting destroyed. So life is complicated. It's not just like we think, oh, I totally want to move on, right? Even if you have a breakup with somebody, it's always very complex, almost always very complex. You never usually say like, oh, I'm totally finished with this person, so no problem, I have no pain in leaving this person. You usually realize, God, I just need to leave this person, but it's painful because I like this, and this about this person. So as there's the death of that relationship, it's painful because there's little bits of it that you want to hang on to. So that's why we experience death as a difficult transition, because we're giving up the main thing, but there's still bits and pieces of it that we wanted to hold on to, and we're anxious about, am I going to be able to get this again? But actually death is not intrinsically a negative thing. It's intrinsically the way of making the space to create something new, or getting the raw materials to create something new. All right, so I hope that sheds some light on what death is from a Vedic and Puranic point of view. And if you have more questions on this topic, I'd love to hear them, even in the comments section. Be happy to answer. Thank you very much. Please stick around, and don't forget to give a thumbs up to this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep in touch. Thanks.